There was a small, dark wood chest at the back of the hallway closet. It wasn't often seen, hidden behind winter coats and empty shoeboxes that might one day be useful. The closet had a particular scent, a mixture of cedar and stored fabric. Whenever the door was opened, a breath of this still air would escape, and the chest would remain in its shadows, covered by a thin layer of dust that time had patiently laid down. No one remembered exactly how it had come to be there. It was just one of those things that exists in a house, a silent, forgotten presence. Perhaps this is just one of those quiet stories, made for relaxing. And sometimes that's all we need. The wood of the chest was a deep tone, almost black in the faint light, and its brass fittings were dull, tarnished by years of damp and neglect. The small shield-shaped lock had a greenish hue from oxidation. It wasn't broken, but it was dormant. Its surface didn't reflect the light, but absorbed it, as if it were tired. It was an object without purpose, an empty vessel holding only air and the memories of the dark. This stillness, this lack of function, was a small imbalance in the silence of the house, a silent invitation, one that had long been ignored. On a Tuesday afternoon, sunlight streamed through the hallway window, forming a golden band on the wooden floor. It was one of those quiet afternoons where the only sounds were the distant hum of a lawnmower and the soft tick-tock of the clock in the living room. Upon opening the closet to look for an old umbrella, the light struck the chest in a different way. For the first time in a long while, it didn't seem like just a forgotten object, but something that was waiting. The dust on it seemed like a covering that could be lifted away. The tarnish on the brass didn't look permanent, but rather a film that hid an ancient gleam. A simple, clear decision formed, unhurried like settling dust. It was time to bring the chest out of that darkness. It was time to give it a little light and care. There was no grand plan or complex motivation. There was only the desire to see that dark wood shine again, to feel the soft click of a clean lock, to turn that dormant object into something present. The silent promise was this: to return life to a forgotten thing, to bring order and beauty to a small corner of the world. The task would be slow, methodical, and it was exactly what the afternoon needed. With the decision made, the atmosphere seemed to adjust. The hallway, once just a place of passage, became the starting point. The sun-warmed wooden floor would be the first stage. The air, once still, now seemed to carry a quiet expectation. The first step was to move the coats aside, one by one, and place them over a nearby chair. Then the shoeboxes were carefully stacked in the corner. The path to the chest was clear. With both hands, it was lifted. It was lighter than it looked, yet still solid, substantial. There was a low, hollow sound as it was lifted from its shelf. As it was brought into the light, the details became clearer. Small carvings of leaves on the sides, almost invisible under the dust. The corners were protected by brass pieces that curved gently over the wood. The dust formed a gray veil over everything, softening the edges and hiding the true color of the wood. The chest was placed carefully on the hallway rug, in the middle of the band of sunlight. There, it seemed strangely vulnerable, out of its hiding place. The work would begin soon. First, it would be necessary to prepare a proper place, a table where each step could be performed with calm and attention. The chest's journey from darkness into light had begun. The chosen place for the work was the small wooden table that sat by the kitchen window. It was a quiet spot, bathed in the soft afternoon light, with a view of the back garden. To protect the table's surface, a thick, old cotton cloth, neutral in color, was spread over it. The fabric was soft and a little worn from use, perfect for cradling the chest without scratching it. The chest was then carried from the hallway to the kitchen and set down gently in the center of the cloth. The sound was muffled, a soft thud that marked the official start of the process. The first task was the simplest and perhaps the most transformative, the cleaning. For this, a few items were gathered. A white ceramic bowl was filled with warm water. Beside it, 2 soft, clean cloths, one for dampening and one for drying, and a brush with very soft bristles, the kind used for dusting delicate objects. Everything was arranged next to the chest, creating a small, orderly, and calm workstation. There was no hurry. Each tool had its place and its moment. The work began with the soft, bristled brush. With light, long strokes, the dry dust was swept from the lid of the chest. The dust rose in small clouds that danced briefly in the sunlight before dissipating. The brush passed over the flat surfaces, into the corners, and across the delicate carvings on the sides. The sound was almost imperceptible, a dry whisper of bristles against wood. With each pass, a bit of the wood's original color began to emerge, a deep, rich walnut tone, though still dull. The dust that collected on the protective cloth was a gray testament of the years of neglect. After all the loose dust was removed, it was time for the water. One of the cloths was dipped into the bowl of warm water and then wrung out tightly until it was just damp, not dripping. The cloth was passed gently over the lid in slow circular motions. The moisture instantly revived the wood, darkening it and revealing the complexity of its grain. Lighter and darker lines appeared, like maps of dry rivers. The scent that rose was of old wood and damp dust, a nostalgic, earthy aroma. The damp cloth worked around the brass fittings, cleaning the wood around them, but not yet focusing on the metal itself. The focus was solely on the wood. The sides were cleaned, then the front and back. The chest was carefully tilted so its base could also be wiped clean. The more stubborn dirt accumulated in the cracks and corners gave way with a little more pressure. The cloth was rinsed in the bowl from time to time, and the once clear water grew murky, tinged with brown and gray. After cleaning with the damp cloth, the second cloth, completely dry and soft, was used to remove any excess moisture. The surface was polished gently, and the wood began to take on a very subtle sheen, a quiet satin finish. Now, free of dust and grime, the true state of the chest could be clearly assessed. There were a few fine scratches on the lid, marks of some old use. One of the brass corners was slightly dented. The right hinge seemed a little loose, and the inside had not yet been opened. The small key was not in the lock. For now, the focus remained on the exterior. The first layer of neglect had been removed. The chest no longer looked like a lost object, but one in the process of being rediscovered. The afternoon light hit it, and for the first time, it reflected it back. With the exterior of the chest now clean, attention turned to the small structural imperfections. They were discrete flaws, signs of time and use, that needed a careful touch to ensure the chest would be solid and functional again. The first issue to address was the right hinge. When the lid was lightly pressed, there was a little give, a tiny movement that shouldn't be there. The chest was rotated on the cloth, so its back faced the light. A small toolbox was brought out and placed on the floor beside the table. It was not a large box filled with complex equipment. It held only the essentials, a few screwdrivers of different sizes, a small hammer, pliers, and some jars of nails and screws. From within, a small flathead screwdriver was selected, its tip fitting perfectly into the brass screws of the hinges. The tool was cool and heavy in the hand. Very carefully, the tip of the screwdriver was set into the slot of one of the loose hinges screws. The motion to tighten it was slow and deliberate. Not much force was needed. A quarter turn, then another. The screw sank deeper into the wood with an almost inaudible creak. The same was done for the other 3 screws on that hinge. After they were tightened, the lid was tested again. The give was gone. Now it was firm, perfectly aligned with the base. A small problem solved with a simple, precise action. The next step was to tend to the slightly deeper scratch on the left side. It wasn't large, but it broke the continuity of the wood grain. For this, a filler wax the same color as the walnut wood was used. A small piece of the wax was warmed between the fingers until it was soft and pliable. The texture was smooth, almost like clay. With a fingertip, the wax was applied over the scratch, pressing it gently into the groove. The excess was removed with a small plastic spatula, leaving the surface level. The wax filled the flaw discreetly. It wasn't an invisible repair, but it integrated into the history of the object, like a well-tended scar. While the wax dried and bonded with the wood, the focus moved to the slightly dented brass corner. It was a subtle imperfection, likely caused by an old fall. Fixing it required extra care. A small block of wood was placed on the inside of the corner for support. On the outside, a folded cloth was positioned over the metal to protect it. With the small hammer, very light, precise taps were delivered onto the cloth. The sound was a muffled tap, tap. Each tap was followed by a pause to inspect the progress. Slowly, the dented metal began to return to its original shape, the gentle curve being restored. Patience was the main tool here. Brute force would only damage the brass and the surrounding wood. After a few minutes of gentle tapping, the corner was almost perfect, its original form recovered. The last task of this stage was one that required only time, the waiting. The chest was left in peace on the table for about an hour, so the wax in the scratch could harden completely. During this time, a cup of tea was made. Steam rose from the mug, and the scent of herbs filled the kitchen. Sitting at the table, a short distance away, it was possible to just watch the chest. It already looked different, more solid, more whole. The small repairs were not just cosmetic, they had returned the object's integrity. It was no longer fragile, it was becoming complete again, piece by piece, gesture by gesture. The structure was now secure. The next step would be to tend to the beauty of its surface. The chest's structure was now firm and its small defects corrected. It was time to focus on the surface of the wood, to return its depth and luster that time had hidden. This was a 2-step process. First, a very gentle sanding to even out the surface, and then the application of an oil to nourish and protect the wood. For the sanding, a very fine grit sandpaper was chosen, almost like a thick paper. The goal was not to remove the old finish, but simply to smooth the surface and prepare it to receive the oil. A small piece of the sandpaper was cut and folded. By hand, the sandpaper was passed over the lid of the chest, always in the direction of the wood grain. The motion was long and continuous, from left to right, with light, steady pressure. The sound was a soft whisper, a rhythmic shh that filled the quiet of the kitchen. A very fine, almost impalpable wood dust began to lift, settling on the surface like a light frost. The scent of dry wood became more present in the air. The work continued along the sides, the front, and the back, with special attention to the areas around the carvings,
where the sandpaper was guided with the fingertips. The texture of the wood began to change under the touch. Where there was once a slight roughness, the surface now became smooth as silk. It was a transformation felt more than seen. After the entire surface had been sanded, the dust was removed with a clean, dry cloth. The chest was wiped down meticulously, ensuring no residue from the sandpaper remained. The wood now had a pale, uniform appearance, like a blank canvas waiting for color. It was ready for the next stage. To nourish the wood, linseed oil was chosen. The glass bottle was opened, and a natural, earthy scent spread through the room. A small amount of the amber-colored oil was poured onto a clean, lint-free cotton cloth. The saturated cloth was then pressed against the wood in the center of the lid. The magic happened instantly. The moment the oil touched the surface, the wood drank it in eagerly. The pale color vanished, giving way to a deep, vibrant walnut tone. The wood grain, once subtle, now leapt into view, its dark and light lines creating a complex and beautiful pattern. With slow, circular motions, the oil was spread across the entire lid. The cotton glided smoothly, leaving a gleaming trail behind. The window light reflected on the oiled surface, highlighting every detail. The process was repeated on the sides, the front, and the back. Every inch of the wood received the same careful attention. The scent of the linseed oil mingled with that of the wood, creating a fragrance of an old workshop, of care and of time. When the entire exterior was covered with a thin, even coat of oil, the chest was left to rest. The wood needed time to absorb the nourishment it had been given. The initial, more intense shine began to soften, transforming into a warm, deep luster. The chest no longer looked old, but antique in the best sense of the word. It wore its marks of use not as flaws, but as part of its identity, now enhanced by the glow of well-cared-for wood. The work on the wood was complete. The soul of the object seemed to have been awakened. It had color, it had texture, it had life. The transformation was profound and visible. The wood of the chest now radiated a deep warmth, its grain dark and rich in the afternoon light. The contrast with the brass fittings, still dull and tarnished, was stark. The time had come to give attention to these metallic details, the shield-shaped lock on the front, the hinges on the back, and the corner protectors. This was the stage of polishing the metal, of bringing back the golden shine that was hidden beneath layers of oxidation. The materials for this task were laid out beside the chest: a small tube of metal polish, some cotton swabs for the trickiest areas, and a set of clean, soft microfiber cloths. The scent of the metal polish, when the tube was opened, was slightly chemical and metallic, a sharp aroma that contrasted with the earthy scent of the linseed oil. The work began with the lock on the front of the chest. A small amount of the polish, a cream-colored paste, was applied directly to the brass with the tip of a cotton swab. The paste was spread carefully, covering the entire surface of the metal shield and the small keyhole, avoiding the newly oiled wood. The cotton swab allowed for precise control, tracing the edges of the lock with exactness. After applying the polish, a microfiber cloth was used to rub the metal. The motion was firm but gentle, in small circles. Almost immediately, a dark tarnish began to appear on the cloth. It was the oxidation, the patina of time, being lifted away. As the cloth moved, the brass underneath began to change. The dull greenish tone gave way to a pale yellow gleam, which intensified with each pass until it became a warm, mirrored gold. The surface, once matte, now reflected the light, the window, and the face of the one leaning over it. The same process was repeated for each piece of metal. The corner protectors, one by one, received the paste and were polished. The heads of the small nails that secured them to the wood were also touched with the tip of a swab, becoming tiny points of golden light. The most delicate work was on the hinges. The chest was turned carefully, and the hinges were polished in the same manner, ensuring that every visible part of the metal was clean and bright. It was repetitive, yet hypnotic work. The transformation of each piece was a small reward. The contrast between the unpolished and the polished sections was remarkable, like the difference between night and day. The microfiber cloth, once pristine, was now covered in dark smudges, a record of the work performed. When all the external hardware was gleaming, a clean cloth was used to wipe away any residue of the polish. The surface of the brass was buffed one last time until it reached its maximum shine. Now the chest was in harmony. The deep, dark wood served as a frame for the gleaming golden brass. The details that had once gone unnoticed now stood out. The shape of the lock's shield, the curves of the corner protectors, everything seemed to have been redrawn by the light. The exterior of the chest was complete. It was an object of quiet beauty, solid, clean, and cared for. But there was still one mystery: its interior. The polished lock was still closed. The small key was not in it, and a quiet search began. Memory suggested looking in places where small things accumulate. The first stop was a drawer in the hallway dresser, the one that held loose keys, old coins, and other small forgotten treasures. Each key was tested in the lock, one by one. They were keys to old doors, to rusted padlocks, to diaries. None of them fit. The search continued, without frustration, only with a serene curiosity. A small sewing box was opened. Among spools of thread and mother-of-pearl buttons, nothing. Finally, inside an old ceramic pot on the living room bookshelf, between dried-up pens and paper clips, there it was, a tiny key made of the same brass as the chest, with a simple, elegant shape. It was so small it had almost been overlooked. With the key in hand, the return to the kitchen was made with a calm expectation. The key was inserted into the lock. It slid in smoothly. A turn to the right, and a metallic click, crisp and satisfying, echoed in the quiet. The latch was released. Carefully, the lid was lifted. The interior of the chest was revealed for the first time in years. A scent of old paper and dry wood emanated, a perfume of contained time. The interior was empty, save for the original lining of velvety paper, a shade of deep red wine, now faded and a little torn at the corners. It was a lining that once had been elegant, but now showed its age. It was decided that the interior also deserved special care. The old lining would be replaced with something new, clean, and soft.
The first step was to remove the old paper. With the fingers, it was pulled up gently. The paper came away in pieces, tearing easily. The old glue had dried and lost its strength. Underneath, the raw wood of the chest's interior was exposed. It was a lighter wood, pine, without the dark finish of the exterior. The inside was wiped with a dry cloth to remove the residue of paper and glue. For the new lining,
A piece of wool felt in a deep moss green color was chosen. The texture was soft and dense, and the color would complement the dark wood and golden brass. The material was laid out on the table. With a tape measure, the dimensions of the bottom and sides of the chest were taken precisely. The measurements were jotted down on a piece of paper. Using the notes, the shapes were drawn with tailor's chalk on the back of the felt, a rectangle for the bottom and 4 rectangles for the sides. A heavy, sharp fabric shears was used to cut out the pieces. The sound of the blade slicing through the felt was low and satisfying. The pieces were cut with care, following the chalk lines perfectly. Applying the new lining began with the bottom. A special fabric glue with a mild scent was applied in a thin, even layer to the wood at the bottom of the chest. The corresponding piece of felt was then positioned carefully, pressing from the center out to the edges to avoid air bubbles. The felt settled in perfectly. Next, the sides were lined, one at a time, using the same method. The seams in the corners were made with precision, creating a continuous velvety interior. When the last piece was glued in place, the inside of the chest was transformed. The moss green felt created a soft, dark nest, a welcoming and protective space. The lid was left open for a while, so the glue could dry completely. The chest was now complete, restored on the outside and renewed on the inside. It was ready, no longer a forgotten object, but a beautiful and functional vessel, waiting to be given a new purpose, to hold things that mattered in the present. The afternoon sun began to dip, and the light in the kitchen grew more golden and soft. The chest rested on the table, its lid open, the scent of fabric glue already faded. The moss green felt interior looked deep and inviting. The work of restoration was finished. Now came the most contemplative part, giving the chest a new place and a new purpose. It would not return to the back of the closet. Its place was now in sight, where its beauty could be appreciated. The chosen spot was a small wooden shelf in the living room, next to a few hardbook books and a small plant with green leaves. It was a place that caught the morning light. The chest was carried with both hands, its weight now familiar and comforting, and placed in its new home. It fit perfectly in the space, the dark wood contrasting with the light-colored wall. Now the question was what to keep inside it. It would not be filled with random objects, but with small, meaningful things that deserved a special place. The decision was not rushed. It was a slow walk through the house, a process of silent selection. First, a small wooden box was opened. Inside, there was a handful of old letters tied with a faded blue satin ribbon. They were family letters, written in an elegant script you no longer see. The ribbon was untied, and the letters were placed carefully on the green felt at the bottom of the chest. The paper was thin and yellowed, its creases permanent. Next to the letters, a small silver pocket watch that no longer worked was placed. Its hands were frozen at 3:10, but its smooth, cool surface was still pleasant to the touch. It was nestled into the felt, its silver gleam a counterpoint to the gold of the chest's hardware.
Then, from a ceramic bowl on the coffee table, 3 smooth stones collected from a beach years ago were chosen. One was dark gray, another white with gray veins, and the third had a greenish hue, polished by countless waves. They were placed in the chest, their solid weight and smooth texture adding a natural element to the collection.
The sound they made against the felt bottom was muted and pleasant. Finally, from a sewing box, an old wooden spool with a little red silk thread still wound around it was retrieved. It was a simple object, but beautiful in its functionality. It was the last to go in, completing the small collection. Each object was now in its place: the letters, the watch, the stones, and the spool. They were not treasures of great monetary value, but anchors of memory, small fragments of time and place. With everything arranged, the lid of the chest was lowered. The click of the lock this time sounded different. It wasn't a sound of closure and forgetting, but of protection and care. The small brass key was left in the lock. Sitting on the sofa, it was possible to contemplate the chest on its shelf. The late afternoon light struck its polished surface, drawing warm reflections from the wood and golden glints from the brass. It was no longer a silent object in the dark, but a serene and steady presence in the room. The process of restoration had transformed not only the object, but also the space around it. The chest, now filled with small memories, radiated a sense of order, of care, and of rediscovered history. It was a point of calm in the room, of finished work, a completed cycle. Night arrived slowly. The colors of the sky outside shifted from gold to a deep blue, and the streetlights began to turn on, casting a soft glow through the window. Inside the living room, a single floor lamp was lit, creating a circle of warm light that left the corners of the room in a comfortable gloom. The house was quiet. The sounds of the day had retreated, giving way to the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant murmur of night traffic. The chest on its shelf seemed to have merged with the tranquility of the room. The lamplight touched its side, highlighting the curve of a brass corner protector and the grain of the dark wood. It was not the focus of the room, but its presence was felt. It was like a low, constant note in a melody, a foundation of stability. A cup of chamomile tea was prepared, its steam rising in slow spirals in the cool night air. Sitting in the armchair, a short distance away, the gaze rested on the shelf. There was nothing left to be done, no piece to fix, no surface to polish. The work was finished. What remained was simply the presence of the result, the simple existence of the chest in its new context. The transformation had been gradual, built over hours of small gestures: cleaning, tightening, filling, sanding, oiling, polishing, lining. Each step had added a layer of care, removing the marks of neglect. Now the object held within it the story of its own restoration: the hands that touched it, the tools that shaped it, the light that revealed it. The small chest did not contain grand secrets or valuable treasures. It held letters, stones, a stopped watch. It guarded simple things. And yet it felt complete. Its function was this: to be a silent guardian of small things, a point of beauty and order. The night deepened. The clock in the living room chimed the hour, its sound resonating softly through the house. The steam from the tea was long since vanished. The chest remained motionless on its shelf, a dark, solid shape in the soft lamplight. It was at peace, and the room with it seemed a little calmer, a little more complete. The cycle was closed. What was forgotten was remembered. What was dormant awakened. And now it simply was.